October 6, 1973, 13:55 hours. The Sinai Peninsula. The silence of the Yom Kippur afternoon is not merely quiet. It is absolute. In the Israeli bunkers along the Bar-Lef line, soldiers are resting, reading, or praying. The heat is a physical weight. Then, the horizon screams. 200 Egyptian aircraft tear through the sky, flying so low the sand kicks up in their wake. Seconds later, the world dissolves into fire. 4,000 Egyptian artillery pieces open up simultaneously, a rhythmic, soul-crushing thunder that can be felt in the bedrock of Jerusalem. Across the Suez Canal, the water churns as thousands of Egyptian Commandos lower rubber boats. They aren't just crossing a river, they are dismantling a myth. In Tel Aviv, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan stands frozen. The intelligence reports were wrong. The impenetrable sand walls are being liquefied by high-pressure water cannons. The invincibility of the Israeli Defense Forces is evaporating in the heat of a coordinated two-front masterstroke. If the Israeli Air Force cannot stop the bridges, the Sinai is lost. If the Golan Heights fall to the Syrian tanks currently massing in the north, the Galilee will burn. This is the moment a nation stares into the abyss of total annihilation. The question remains, can it survive the dawn? This is the Arab-Israeli wars, the conflict that never truly ended. The geopolitical landscape of the early 1970s was a pressurized chamber. To understand the explosion of 1973, one must look at the scarred remains of 1967. The Six-Day War had ended in a triumph so absolute for Israel that it birthed a dangerous psychological byproduct: hubris. Israel now held the Sinai, the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights. They felt secure behind the Bar-Lef line, a chain of sophisticated fortifications along the Suez Canal. But for the Arab world, 1967 was Al-Naksa, the setback. It was a wound that would not heal. The humiliation demanded a reckoning. Egypt's economy was hemorrhaging under the cost of a no-peace, no-war stalemate. The Soviet Union began pumping advanced surface-to-air missiles and TS-62 tanks into Cairo and Damascus. The world was distracted. The United States was bogged down in Vietnam and the burgeoning Watergate scandal. The Cold War superpowers were attempting to... But beneath the surface, the Middle East was a powder keg. For Egypt and Syria, the status quo was death. For Israel, the status quo was a fortress. Both were about to be proven wrong. The fate of millions rested on the shoulders of three men, each trapped by their own history. Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, was a man living in the shadow of Gamal Abdel Nasser. Most Western analysts dismissed him as a lightweight, a temporary placeholder. They failed to see his cold, calculating pragmatism. Sadat didn't need to destroy Israel to win. He needed to break the stalemate. He was a gambler who understood that a limited military victory could force a diplomatic opening. In Israel, Golda Meir, the Iron Lady of the Middle East, presided over a cabinet convinced of their own superiority. Meir was a formidable leader, but she relied heavily on her military commanders, specifically Moshe Dayan and Amman intelligence chief Eli Zayera. Dayan was a tactical genius but a mercurial strategist. He believed the Arabs would not attack until they had Air Paratia feet years away. This conception, as it was later called, became a blindfold. In the north, Syria's Hafez al-Assad was the ideological counterweight. Unlike Sadat's pragmatic goals, Assad sought a total reversal of 1967. He was grim, methodical, and ruthless. While Sadat played a game of chess, Assad prepared for a war of attrition. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance of convenience, fueled by shared resentment and Soviet hardware. The build-up to the war was a masterclass in deception, orchestrated primarily by Egyptian intelligence. Codenamed Operation Badr, the plan relied on the most effective camouflage: the truth. Egypt conducted massive mobilizations along the canal dozens of times throughout 1973. Each time, Israel called up its expensive reserves. Each time, nothing happened. By the time the real attack was launched, the Israeli military had been conditioned to see the movement of 100,000 troops as just another drill. Geographically, the challenge was immense. The Suez Canal was a massive anti-tank ditch. Beyond it sat the Bar-Lef lines and ramparts 60 feet high. Behind those were buried pipes designed to flood the canal with flammable oil, turning the water into a literal sea of fire. In the north, the Golan Heights offered a narrow, rocky bottleneck. On the morning of October 6th, the intelligence failure reached its zenith. Despite frantic warnings, the Israeli cabinet delayed a full mobilization. They feared that striking first would alienate the United States. They chose to wait. It was a choice that would cost thousands of lives. At 14 o'clock hours, the sky over the Sinai turned black. The Egyptian crossing was surgical. Using specialized hypersure pumps, engineers blasted holes through the Bar-Lef sand walls in hours. The sea of fire never materialized. Egyptian commandos had surreptitiously plugged the pipes with concrete the night before. By 16 o'clock hours, the first Egyptian tanks were rolling across the bridges. The Israeli armored brigades, rushing forward in small, uncoordinated groups, ran into a nightmare. They expected to dogfight Egyptian MiGs. Instead, they were met by a missile wall. The Soviet-made SA-6 and SA-7 systems created an umbrella of death over the canal. The Israeli Air Force, the finest in the world, was being swatted from the sky like flies. On the ground, the Israeli tanks were hunted by infantry. For the first time, the Arab foot soldier was equipped with a Sagar anti-tank guided missile. From a mile away, a single soldier could guide a wire-controlled charge into the turret of a multi-million-dollar Patton tank. The hunters had become the hunted. In the north, the situation was even more dire. 5 Syrian divisions and 1,200 tanks slammed into the Golan Heights, defended by only 2 Israeli brigades and 170 tanks. The Valley of Tears became a charnel house. Israeli tankers, some fighting in vehicles they had literally just driven out of storage, engaged Syrian T-62s at point-blank range. The Syrian nighttime optics were superior. They could see the Israelis in the dark. The Israelis had to wait for the flash of a Syrian muzzle to know where to fire. By the end of the second day, the Syrian vanguard was within sight of the Sea of Galilee. If they broke through, there was nothing between them and the heart of Israel. In the pit, the underground command center in Tel Aviv, Moshe Dayan sat in near catatonic shock. He spoke of the destruction of the Third Temple. He suggested preparing unconventional weapons. But the battlefield is where plans die and legends are forged. The turning point did not come from a grand headquarters, but from the grid of individual commanders. On the Golan, Zvika's force, a single Israeli tank led by Lieutenant Zvika Greengold, spent 20 hours engaging dozens of Syrian tanks, constantly changing positions. His deception held the line just long enough for the first reserves to arrive. In the Sinai, the momentum shifted during the greatest tank battle since Coup. On October 14th, the Egyptians, pressured by the Syrians to relieve stress on the northern front, pushed their tanks out from under their missile umbrella. It was a fatal mistake. Without SAM protection, the IEF tore them apart. Sensing the opening, General Ariel Sharon found a seam between the Egyptian 2nd and 3rd armies. In a daring night operation, Sharon's paratroopers and tanks crossed the canal back into Egypt. They weren't just counterattacking. They were hunting the SAM sites. Once the missile batteries were destroyed on the ground, the IF was unleashed. The missile wall was shattered. Within days, the Israeli 162nd Division was 40 miles from Cairo in the north. The Syrians were pushed back beyond the 1967 lines. The superpowers scrambled. The Soviet Union threatened to intervene directly to save their clients. The United States went to DEFCON 3, the highest peacetime alert. The world held its breath as the 2 nuclear titans teetered on the edge of a direct confrontation. Finally, a unbrokered ceasefire was forced upon the combatants. The guns went silent on October 25th. The cost was staggering. Israel suffered over 2,500 dead and 7,500 wounded. Egypt and Syria lost an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 men. Thousands of tanks and hundreds of aircraft lay rusting in the desert sands. The political fallout was seismic. Golda Meir's government collapsed under the weight of the Agranite Commission's findings on the intelligence failures. The myth of Israeli invincibility was dead. Conversely, Anwar Sadat achieved exactly what he wanted. He proved that Egypt could fight. He restored Arab pride, which gave him the political capital to do the unthinkable. However, the war also birthed a darker legacy. The 1973 oil embargo, launched by Arab states against supporters of Israel, sent the global economy into a tailspin, marking the end of the post-World War II golden age of growth. The critical mistake of the Yom Kippur War was not found in a single tactical error, but in the seductive trap of the conception. Israeli leadership became convinced that their enemy was static, that their previous victories were a permanent state of being rather than a fleeting advantage. They forgot that a humiliated enemy is the most dangerous kind. They confused past performance with future reality. Military historians look back at 1973 as the dawn of the modern high-tech battlefield. It was the first war where precision-guided munitions and electronic warfare dictated the outcome. It proved that massed armor without infantry and air support was a graveyard. It showed that the human factor, the psychological readiness of a nation, is the only defense that cannot be mapped by a satellite. Today, the Sinai is quiet, but the echoes of 1973 remain. The border between Israel and Syria is a jagged line of tension. The tactical lessons of the Golan Heights are still taught at West Point and Sandhurst. The Yom Kippur War serves as a haunting reminder that, in the theater of conflict, the greatest danger is not the strength of your enemy, but the certainty of your own shadows. When the sun sets over the Suez Canal, the rusted hulks of tanks still sit in the sand monuments to a 3-week war that changed the world forever, leaving behind a peace that is as fragile as it is essential. The conflict didn't end in 1973. It simply changed shape, waiting for the next moment when silence is mistaken for security.